All right. Hello, hello, hello. We are so excited to see all of you here tonight, both folks who are here live right now and folks who will be watching later. And we're excited to dive into a really important topic tonight where we are going to be doing some Scrupulosity 101. We are going to be going back to the basics. In a lot of streams lately, we've gotten questions about, again, kind of what is OCD and ERP and what does this look like with particular subtypes. And we're going to really do that tonight with Scroop, which everybody here has some sort of expertise in and passion for. But as always, we're going to start off on this stream by asking kind of a fun question to the group, and I'll ask everybody here as well. I always get to this point and realize that I didn't plan the fun question. So this is, I'm always like, what do we do right now? So I'm like, okay, let's see. Oh, you know what? I haven't done this in a while. And folks in the chat, please chime in too. What is the most, what is a current, everybody here might not have current pets. What is a current pet you have? And if not a current pet, what is a pet that you wish you had? And folks in the chat, as you come in and say hi and where you're from, please share that with us as well. A pet either that you have or that maybe you wish that you had. So Caitlin, I'll go with you first.
Baby girl Kitty. And she only likes me and my husband. Everybody else stay within like a 2-meter radius of this cat because she will aggressively try to do something harmful to you. But she's the sweetest little girl. She like lays down on my chest and she's purring all the time.
What's her name?
Dahlia.
Dahlia.
Yes.
I love that. Wouldn't change it for the world, would you?
Absolutely not. No. And I had a friend who loves cats and like has a famous cat Instagram and everything. And so she cat sit for us a couple times when we were out of town. And she's like, she knows her boundaries. I respect that.
I'm like, cats know their boundaries. We could do a whole segment on cats know their boundaries so much better than dogs, right? Dogs kind of like, I'll do anything. And cats are like, no, need some personal space. So I love that. Awesome. Annabella, do you have a pet right now, or is there a pet that you wish that you
had? Not right now, but I had 2 wonderful golden doodles. First, Sky, and I have a granddaughter with autism. So I trained her, and then I gave her to my son and their family. Then the sister, my other granddaughter, got jealous. She's not in the spectrum, but she wanted a pet. So they asked me to train the second pet, which was Ruby. And then I gave her to them, and I adore them. And I love golden doodles. And I'm telling my husband, I want a pet of my own, but he's not buying it. So we'll have to see. But I love golden doodles and golden retrievers. That's my thing.
You're amazing, one, for doing that. And 2, I think you deserve a golden doodle of your own. So we will be checking back.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you. And I do see, yes, Cash, we are not going to start the cat versus dog debate. I promise. That is not something we're going to do tonight.
Maybe we should.
Or
maybe we should.
Or maybe we just talk about Scrupulosity, but you know.
I feel like this might be a last-minute change of topic.
You know. And we'll see my discomfort come out for folks getting upset in the chat about cat versus dog. Emily, I actually think I know yours, but I'm gonna let you share maybe pet you wish.
That's because I text you about it like every day. Right now I have a Eurymastix. It's a lizard and it has a spiky tail like a dinosaur. So if it doesn't like you, it like whips its tail at you. So that's kind of scary sometimes. But what I'm wanting, I want 2 animals right now. I want the cat that's outside and it's a stray, and I just was petting it before the live stream. But I also want a Basenji. Like, this is a dog that I've always wanted, and my husband just gets me so excited because I look at like all of the animals, like all of the on Pet Binder and whatnot, and then he's like, no, not right now. It's so mean. So, I mean, if anyone else wants to support me and just send a chat that's like, Emily deserves a dog or a cat, go ahead, because...
Or, as Sarah suggests, a dragon.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
option.
That works too. Yeah.
I don't know where you would keep it, but...
I don't think my apartment would allow it, but we
Mm-hmm.
could sneak it in.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Exactly.
I love everything that y'all are chiming in with. I see pugs, I see labs, I see dragons, I see Patrick McGrath on LinkedIn with neither, which makes no sense to me. So we can have that conversation later. But so glad that you all are here. And Cash with a former three-legged dog. So thank y'all so much for chiming in with all of that. So we're going to go ahead and jump in with our topic for tonight. This live stream is educational. It is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. If you are in crisis or if you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. You can also access online at www.988lifeline.org. And finally, we want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. At the end of the day, we are here to support one another. A note that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms and is being recorded, so please be mindful of that as you comment in the chat. But this is a community, and I will say my favorite thing about these streams is watching folks advocate in the chat, watching you share your experience, your love, your compassion, your resources with one another. So that is absolutely something that we encourage. I am going to go ahead and jump in and introduce our awesome panelists tonight. So for anybody that I don't know, I will be hosting tonight. I'm Katie O'Dunn. I'm an ordained minister and IOCDF lead advocate, and I work at the intersection of faith and OCD and do lots of different things, but probably, again, my favorite is doing what we're doing right now, having conversations about scrupulosity and faith and OCD and making sure that everyone has access to evidence-based treatment across faith spaces. We have Emily Bailey here, who is Dr. Emily Bailey, who is currently working at the Anxiety Treatment Clinic in Atlanta, Georgia, where she treats children, adolescents, and adults who present with OCD and anxiety disorders. She obtained her doctorate in clinical psychology from Mercer University. Her research interests include social anxiety disorders and attentional disengagement, therapeutic alliance, treatment-seeking behaviors, and parental influence on child psychopathology. While her clinical focus is individuals diagnosed with OCD and other anxiety disorders, she has experience working with diverse populations using evidence-based treatment, including CBT and ERP. Emily is passionate about helping her patients achieve a more meaningful, satisfying, and valued life. So glad to have
Hi, everyone. That's like the hardest part of this live stream for me.
Then we have Dr. Caitlin Claggett-Woods, who is a licensed clinical psychologist and founding member of Anxiety Ottawa. She works with adults with OCD, obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders, anxiety-related disorders, and PTSD, providing individual therapy, assessment, and family consultation. In addition, Dr. Claggett-Woods created and facilitates a goal group for adults with OCD and provides supervision and training to students, community therapists, and clergy. She is a member of the IOCDF's faith-based task force and is an adjunct faculty member at the University of Ottawa. Dr. Claggett-Woods is passionate about guiding her clients to recovery through values and a strong sense of humor, advocacy, and training the next generation of specialists. I will put a star next to humor in a big way, which is one of the reasons we love having her on. So welcome, Caitlin.
I mean, everybody that I connect with on the phone, it's like, oh, what's going on with you? And let's set up an appointment. And then they come in, we do the assessment. And if ERP is a good fit for them, then it's like, this is, what ERP involves. And I end it with a caveat. And I guarantee you, in treatment, you will laugh. And no one ever believes me until they're doing something like, getting their contaminated hands and diving hands first into ice cream and like squishing ice cream all around in their hands. And then they're like, this is ridiculous. So yeah, I guarantee them all that they will laugh at some point.
We had a meeting the other day and I thought you were talking about a show and you were like, we were dancing in the street. I saw or something and you were actually dancing in the street because that's what we do. Yeah.
No, a little dancing in the street, a little singing, doing cartwheels across the street, at the safe crosswalk, of course. But we have some good times. One of my clients doing an exposure got free cake. It cost $9 and she got it for free because she forgot her wallet. So he was just like, here, have a cake.
I'm going to try that tomorrow.
Yeah, you really should. It was really delicious.
I love that. Well, we're so excited to have you here, Caitlin. And Annabella, so excited to have Annabella Hagen, who is the clinical director and founder of Mindset Family Therapy in Utah. Her focus is working with clients who suffer from anxiety, OCD, and obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders. She is passionate about teaching ACT, and she loves to see her clients progress as they fully engage in their treatment and experience the journey back to living a value-centered life. Annabella obtained her MSW degree from Brigham Young University. She is a member of the International OCD Foundation and the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science. She is a regular presenter for the IOCDF's yearly conferences, and she is a leader on our Faith and OCD Task Force, an author of many books, including, one of my favorites, Imperfectly Good, which is a fantastic ACT workbook for OCD and Scrupulosity that I'm sure we will talk about tonight. So welcome, Annabella.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, we are going to dive in, and I appreciate folks chiming in the chat and welcoming our awesome panelists tonight. And Cash, wishing this was available 25 years ago. I think a lot of folks can relate to wishing maybe some of these resources virtually were available at that point, but we're so glad that they're here now. And it's one of the reasons that we're excited to engage with all of you here tonight. So we're going to dive into some basics around scrupulosity and around OCD. But as we move through, please, please, please drop some questions into the chat, and we will do our best to get to all of them as we move through the night. And if we don't, I will let you know kind of where to send them afterwards, but we are going to do our best. So go ahead and start loading up questions as we are chatting. I'm going to start by asking the group, and it seems like a really basic question, but I think it's always important when we're doing a 101. What is OCD? And I would love we can define it really briefly, but I'd actually love to go to all of our panelists and hear from you when you're telling someone what OCD is for the first time, or when someone's just been diagnosed. How do you describe OCD? How do you define OCD? Caitlin, I'll go to you first. What's OCD?
I mean, me being the therapist that I am, I love my whiteboard. And so when we're talking and I'm giving an explanation of what OCD is, our diagnostic manual is really emphasizing the intrusive, unwanted thoughts that are just not aligned with who you are as a person whatsoever, and the things that you do to try to make the thoughts and the distress go away. So when I'm drawing this out for people, it's like, here's something that brought on an intrusive thought, and then you interpret that thought as being meaningful, right? This thought is important and gets treated as such, whether it's related to, I need to be responsible for everything, or there's an overestimation of risk, or if I think it is just as bad as doing it, all these different ways that we kind of, interpret our thoughts as being meaningful, which causes us to feel distress. And then what do we do when we feel upset and we feel like we've had a really upsetting thought? We try to get rid of it through some kind of ritual or avoidance. Right. And so then that gets us caught up into a loop of, I feel a bit of relief, and then that relief passes and I do it again, and on and on and on and on. And then what the part that I love to drive home to people is like, okay, well, how do you get from behavior to this perpetual cycle of more and more and more intense, intrusive thoughts? And what happens is what I like to call the oh bleep response. The S word response. Maybe there's some kids listening, I don't know. But basically it's like your mind is like, oh goodness, I just prevented disaster by doing this thing. I need to be on the lookout and make sure that thoughts like these or situations like this don't happen again. So because you did something behavioral, your mind gets reinforced of like, oh yeah, I just prevented disaster. And then again, you're on the alert. Your mind is on the alert for more thoughts and dangerous situations. And so it goes and goes and goes and goes.
That's such a great description. And it does. I think everybody here can probably relate as you're hearing. It goes and goes and goes again and keeps going. and we can't break out of that cycle, which is something that we're going to, well, we're going to talk tonight about what that looks like and how we might be able to do that. I'd love to go, Emily, to how you might define OCD and maybe what you would add on to Caitlin, or if somebody's coming in for the first time with you, how would you define it?
Yeah. I mean, I define it very similarly, right? Just talking about the cycle and why the cycle is maintained and kind of how we plan on breaking that cycle. I think I also add in, what the different subtypes of OCD, right? And I actually kind of use your phrase of ice cream. Sometimes if I'm like craving pizza, I'll just say disgusting like pizza toppings instead. So sorry, I took some liberty and just shifted it a little bit. But oftentimes I go more into the subtypes as well, just depending on what they're experiencing and letting them know that OCD can actually jump themes. The treatment is all the same, right? But sometimes OCD latches onto one thing because you value it so much and it's so important. And then, a few weeks later, a month later, a year later, you're on to the next theme. And it's all treated the same, which is great. And it gives so much more hope. And it can get tricky. It can get sticky really quick.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's so important. And Cash is saying this in the chat too. Your mind gets trickier, it gets cleverer, it gets more manipulative. And it does. Sometimes it feels like we're playing this game of whack-a-mole where it's not really about the theme. It's just shifting from thing to thing to thing that's the most important to us. So Annabella, I wonder, how would you define OCD? And maybe in a similar way, but that's okay.
Well, I will probably say the same thing that Caitlin and Emily have said, but I will add something to it. I always tell my clients that they are not different than I am. I don't have OCD. They have intrusive thoughts, unwanted thoughts. I also do. The difference is that their thoughts are sticky. And so when they try to get rid of them, they actually become stickier. And the reason why they become stickier is because they don't match who they are or the person they want to become. I also talk about compare OCD with the bow that you have to keep on tying. If you have a gift and you're wrapping the bow and it gets untied, and then the compulsion is you have to keep tying it. And so I compare that with OCD because the uncertainty, the urge to find certainty is what drives you to keep tying the bow and leave it there, and it gets untied. So we talk about uncertainty as well, and be able to learn to see uncertainty in a different way than they have been in the past. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also use the pizza metaphor, but I think that we all know about the pizza metaphor, so I won't talk about
and
that.
Annabella, what you're saying there, it's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, I have intrusive thoughts, you have intrusive thoughts, so does everybody. And when I was in my training, it's like, until I was at an placement at the OCD Institute at McLean Hospital, I didn't know that I had intrusive thoughts until I started that placement. And it's like, oh yeah, these are here all the time. And I had no idea. And it's also funny, like people in my personal life, and they're like, well, I don't have thoughts like that. And it's like, no, you do. I see you like having them. You just don't know that's what it is. So sometimes,
yes.
people in your life might say, well, that doesn't happen to me. And it's like, yeah, it does. You just don't know that that's what that is.
Yeah, and that's the difference between someone with OCD too and someone who doesn't have OCD. It's the fact that they pay attention to the thought versus an individual who doesn't have OCD doesn't pay attention. That's why we don't even realize it's there. I've actually gotten into the habit now of like trying to like remember all of my intrusive thoughts so I can like when I'm giving psychoeducation, I can just drop it. Be like, so I had this intrusive thought the other day. What are your thoughts about my thought?
Yeah. The other thing is, I always tell my clients the goal in treatment is for you to learn how to respond to the thought, like people that don't have OCD respond to the thoughts, just like, oh, I'm noticing that thought, and yes, it's weird, I don't know, and then keep going versus get stuck with them and trying to say, why, what does it mean? What does it mean about me? And all that stuff that makes them stickier. So I try to normalize their challenge by saying, you're not different than me. It's just the stickiness of them is there.
It's that bleep that made them so important.
It's yeah, as soon as we try to resist it or and it's so interesting. Annabella, I'm so glad you brought that up for folks to hear. Intrusive thoughts are just thoughts. Everybody's got them, but it's the importance we place on them. It's the stickiness with OCD that so many folks might relate to. And the biggest question I tend to get is, well, I always have folks say, well, why that thought? Why am I stuck on that one? I'd be okay with any of these other ones. Like, I want what that person has, but why mine? And it's like, well, it's Caitlin, to your point about the bleep moment, it's like what you are giving importance to. It's the thought that you're noticing and is getting sticky because you're saying, well, I don't want that thought. Let me get rid of that. And your brain is all of a sudden going, oh, that one must be important.
I must say, those comments always make me chuckle a little bit, because when I was at the OCDI and we've got all of these clients in residential treatment and all saying to each other, well, if I had your OCD, it would be totally fine. Like, I'd be great with it. Everyone was saying that to each other. It was a little bit comical. It's like, everybody here is in residential treatment.
I had a big experience recently, and we'll shift more into kind of what Scroop is, but it's really funny. I had an experience recently with somebody I was working on with Scrupulosity, a client, and working on a team, and the person asked me, well, like, you have OCD. What if some of your themes been? And I explained it. And I thought I was like being super heartfelt, and they looked at me and they were like, that's dumb. Mine is so much harder than yours. I would take yours any day. And I was like, oh, okay. But that's how we feel, right? It's like, well, that I'm not stuck on that because that's not what is important. So what we're talking about tonight is specifically scrupulosity, which I know can be so tough for folks, especially with what Annabella was highlighting with uncertainty and this idea in treatment of embracing uncertainty, particularly if we're talking about issues of morality or issues of religion or spirituality. So I'd love to start with just what is scrupulosity, religious scrupulosity, moral scrupulosity, whatever it is that we're talking about. And Annabella, I'd love to go to you. How would you define scrupulosity?
Sure. Again, we have scrupulosity that can be moral scrupulosity and religious scrupulosity. And like we were talking about, the OCD targets what you care about. So if you care, if you're not religious at all, but you have these moral values that are important to you, like honesty and being kind and serving others, that has nothing to do with religion, but you care about these values, well, guess what? OCD is going to target that, and then it's going to create those thoughts about, I am not good enough neighbor, I'm not a good enough student, mother, whatever it is, right? That's targeting your values. And then you start constantly questioning yourself and creating behaviors that will release the anxiety or other feelings that you experience because you want to be so good. I once met a young man who actually had religious OCD, but I didn't meet him when he had religious OCD. He abandoned his faith, and by the time I met him, he was not a religious anymore, but he still had this scrupulosity. And I told him, again, he believed that by abandoning his faith, he was going to be all good. And then I said, well, actually, it is about the thoughts. It's about what you're responding to the thoughts, because in this case now he had moral scrupulosity. So it is, again, targeting what you care about. And I do believe personally by my clients and loved ones that scrupulosity OCD, especially religious OCD, can be very painful, because I see how your faith is so entrenched, and when you start having doubts about God's existence, is very, very painful. So basically, OCD will target your faith, your values, and then you also perceive that you're not good enough or that you are sinful. You are perceiving that, but it's not necessarily true. And that's where they get entangled. And the job is, of course, to get untangled and unhooked from all those things that are interrupting their life, their faith, most importantly, or their morals.
Thank you so much, Annabella, and Sarah in the chat. Thank you for kind of responding to that with your own experience too. I think it's so, one of the saddest things to me, Annabella, what you just described, is when someone leaves behind something that's meaningful or value driven to them because they feel like, oh, well, this is the only way for me to get rid of this experience. And
Mm-hmm.
the reality
Yeah.
is, walking away from something that's meaningful to us, whether it's faith, or with our OCD, it might be your relationship, or if you have intrusive thoughts about a pet or a child, saying, hey, I'm not going to engage with this anymore, it actually only makes the OCD stronger. And it's so sad to see you giving up something you care about, where OCD is still there. It'll continue to morph and shift and change and do its thing. But the reality is, by treatment, like some of the treatment we're talking about tonight, you can actually reconnect with your faith in a value-driven way, not defined by OCD. And that's what we want for you to be able to live into that, not in our way, but in the way that is meaningful and value-driven for you. But just going back, I guess, to continuing to define, Emily or Caitlin, I wonder if y'all have anything additional to add about scrupulosity, how you would define it, what it is.
I mean, I think I would say everything that Annabella said. But yeah, I think it's just OCD latches onto something that's important. It's beliefs, it's your faith practice, it's your spirituality, and you end up practicing in a way that's not in line with actual faith, right? It's much more in line with some rigidity or an extreme way of practicing that's more dictated by fear than it is by actually like longing to have a relationship with God or faith. It's really dictated by that fear of, if I don't do this, something may happen, something bad may happen. And that's very vague, right? But just insert obsession here. Whatever that looks like for you, it's recognizing that faith is hijacking it. It's trying to make your world a lot smaller. It's trying to make sure that you don't go toward the thing you value. But yeah, that's pretty much what I would say. I think Annabella did a great job.
If I'm thinking about kind of the moral scrupulosity and religious scrupulosity, I kind of boil it down to two kind of main fears or concerns. One is kind of not being a good person, ultimately and truly at the end, discovering that you are not a good person, and the other being rejected by God. And the moral scrupulosity aspect of not being a good person just brings to mind, if you've ever seen the movie the show The Good Place, and it talks about how you end up in the good place or the bad place, and how it's all based on these unintended consequences, right? And so it's like, oh, you got this tomato at the grocery store. Well, don't you know that the farmer who who put that tomato out on the shelves, well, he hit his wife. And therefore, because you bought his tomato, you are therefore have a tick against you in the good person category. And so collecting all of these unintended consequence ticks, and that's really at kind of the varying levels of moral scrupulosity, that's how you'll see it turn out. You know, it's like, well, I can't put something in the recycling bin because maybe they put that recycling bin into the trash, and therefore I have just thrown something away, and therefore I'm not a good person, you know, because I haven't actually recycled. Like, it can really get spun in all of these different directions, you know, or same thing with the religious scrupulosity and this fear of being rejected by God. Therefore, I have to make sure that I am absolutely making sure that I am praying with my full heart. And if I'm not praying with my full heart, then I have to, you know, kind of keep doing it until I get it right, or however it is that manifests for somebody. But that's kind of how I boil it down to those two. Oh, Katie, I lost your audio.
I muted, I'll be fully transparent. I muted myself because my cat is making a ton of noise and really wants to come in here and like knock around all of my stuff. So that's where we are right now. I love being able to talk about this and have folks here. One, working on the faith side, I'm passionate about this, but moral scrupulosity, everything Caitlin was talking about, and as folks ask questions, I'm happy to answer this too. That's been my experience with OCD since the beginning. My core fear has always been, what if I'm a bad person? I mean, that is the biggest thing that I've now, with every theme really throughout my life, whether it related to harm or POCD or religious OCD or anything else, it was, what if I'm a bad person? What if I find out that I'm horrible? And that feels terrifying. I mean, going back even to Matt, because OCD is ego dystonic. It opposes everything that we care about. And yet ERP is life-changing. ERP is very much life-saving. Treatment is life-saving. And I love seeing Erica at 727, who said, I stayed out of church for 16 years because of my scrupulosity and religious trauma. But using ERP, I finally got a true, genuine relationship with God by engaging in treatment. And that is such a beautiful thing, whatever that looks like for you in your practice, to be able to engage in treatment and reconnect with your faith or with your life in a meaningful, value-driven way. And that's what treatment does. So we're going to talk a little bit about evidence-based treatment for OCD. I'm going to go over to Emily on this one first, because Matt highlighted a little earlier in the chat that he loves your little e big RP, which I also love, and would love if you would talk a little bit about evidence-based treatment for OCD.
I will talk about evidence-based treatment. I feel like I do this every day, all day, and it's my favorite thing. So what is exposure and response prevention? It's gold standard treatment for OCD. That means that there's been tons of studies done, right, that show that this is an effective way to treat OCD and get great outcomes, meaning you can live your life again. And yes, OCD may still sometimes pop up, but you can really live your life in a way that's values-driven. Exposure and response prevention involves exposing the exposure piece, exposing yourself to a situation that you fear, or, you know, an object you fear, whatever that may look like for you, and then engaging in response prevention. And that just involves reducing or eliminating the compulsions, right? And so when we think about the OCD cycle that we were talking about earlier, what we're really targeting here is the compulsion. We had an awesome talk just a little bit ago about how thoughts just pop up. Intrusive thoughts happen to everybody. We can't control what thoughts pop in our head and what thoughts don't pop in our head. So what we do for treatment is we really emphasize the compulsion piece, right? We really emphasize how can we eliminate or reduce the compulsion? And part of that just involves identifying the trigger, of course, the obsession, right? The intrusive thought that really doesn't feel aligned with what you experience in life, and how you reduce that distress. For the little, I guess I have to talk about the little E and big RP. Little E and big RP, this is essentially just saying that I really would want somebody to start with a lower level exposure, right? Something that's easier, something that builds our confidence that we can actually fight and face our OCD. So starting with something that's a little bit easier for you and working your way up once you build the confidence, the skills, and really just the strength to combat OCD and what it throws at you. So we start with a smaller exposure and really, really emphasize not doing a compulsion or reducing the compulsion in some ways. So if anyone has been in treatment before, there's sometimes a tendency to want to jump in, right? To just be like, I'm going to do the hardest thing first, and it's going to be great, and I'm going to get through it. And then they start struggling, right? Or they engage in compulsions later that night, even if they didn't in the moment. And so what this is essentially saying is, let's not do that. Let's take this slow. And let's really give ourselves time to build our ability to not respond to what OCD throws at us. That's little E, big RP.
And if I can just jump in on that a little bit, like the main reason why we so strongly emphasize like response prevention heavy is so as to undermine all of those kind of ways that OCD distorts our beliefs, right? So the way I frame it is, when I'm asking clients, we're choosing an exposure, what are you willing to do that is challenging and that you're willing to do without rituals? Because if you do an exposure and rituals, that's just OCD, right? That's just trigger, ritual. It's just the same cycle. But what are you willing to do that is challenging, right? That is taking a step for you, and that you're willing to do without rituals? Because it is only without rituals that we really undermine those beliefs that I had mentioned earlier, undermining the beliefs about, the overestimation of risk, or that if I think it, it's just as bad as doing it, or if I think it, it's likely to happen. Like, it is through the ritual prevention that those beliefs are undermined.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes that even starts with like me doing something that they would be anxious about, right? So like, I put my hand on the faucet that they don't want to touch first, right? And that's enough to trigger a response, right? You can start anywhere, right? It's really very much about collaboration. And my hope would be for anyone who's listening right now would be to find the therapist who's willing to collaborate with you and jump right in too, right? Because it can be scary the first few times you do it.
Mm-hmm. It can. And I think I love, it's why I love this idea of the response, well, the little E, big RP, and then what Caitlin tagged on with the response prevention piece. You're right. If we're just doing scary stuff and then compulsing, like we're kind of just doing the OCD thing, and that's not making anything better. I will be fully honest. That was a big component for me for a long time of actually why I wasn't getting better from an OCD space. When I was serving in a school chaplaincy role, I wanted so badly for my OCD not to bother me. I had so much shame with the intrusive thoughts I was experiencing, and how could I be a chaplain? How could I be working with kids and be experiencing OCD? And all I wanted it to do was to go away. And I was so frustrated because I felt like I was working so hard. I was doing like the highest level possible exposures. And then I was ruminating the entire day while I was teaching kids, trying to prove that I was a good person and that nothing bad was going to happen. We know how that goes. That doesn't work. I was, yes, doing really big exposures, but I wasn't doing that response prevention. I was flipping what Emily says. I was doing a big E and probably no RP if we're really honest about it. So OCD wasn't getting any better. And those mental compulsions, that rumination, that counts too, where we really want to focus on leaning in and doing things where we're not giving OCD any response, where we're showing ambivalence to that. But I wonder what can be really tough. And I think, we talked about exposures being kind of scary. I think one of the things that can be scary in the area of scrupulosity, whether it's moral or religious, is people worry that they're going to be asked to do things that oppose their values. And that can be really scary. I see folks all the time that say, like, how could I possibly do that? So yeah, Annabella, I wanted to go to you to address, how do you respond to that when someone says, but what if I'm asked to do something that opposes what I believe?
Yeah, so I totally agree with the ERP as we were talking about, but I actually use acceptance commitment therapy, ACT, and ERP. And what we actually talk about mainly at the beginning is your values. Why are you here? Of course, they are here because, let's say, they care about God and they have had a strong relationship with God, but now they're doubting God, let's say. And so the value is targeted, that's the faith, right? So how are we going to do that? So how much do you want to have that? How bad is it? Meaning, how bad do you want it? And so we talk about willingness. What are you willing to do? So what we do is actually talk about the top 5 values and then decide on the activities that they're going to do regarding those values. And for example, I'll just give you a client example. She has been avoiding scriptures, Bible study, all these things, because when she's reading, the mind is saying, oh, but this is probably not true, or this is made up, or all this stuff, right? So she didn't want to have anything to do with it. So we talk about training wheels. I'm sure you all have done training wheels, which is basically doing the easy stuff first. So I was asking her, what would you be willing to do for at least 5 seconds or 10 seconds where you start reading and then the thought shows up, and what is the mind saying? The mind is saying this is not true, okay? What is the feeling? What's the sensation that you're experiencing? Would you be willing to open up, be willing to experience it at least for 5 seconds, 10 seconds? Notice if you're fighting, if you're struggling with that. So we actually work on the being willing to accept the sensations, being willing to accept the uncertainty as the moment on the exposure. And then when it gets really hard, we talk about, why are you doing this again? Oh yeah, because I want to connect with God. Okay, good. Then would you be willing to do a little bit more? So it's a little bit different but it's really the same. It's just the language that we use is different, because again, the value-based exposure is we are doing the things that they have not done, that they care about. So they're very motivated. And nevertheless, they go at their own pace, no question. But I have to tell you about this client that completely refused. We use metaphors and a lot of things, and she's coming around. She's reading her scriptures now and having more clear mind, because again, she was willing. That willingness part of the uncertainty and feeling anxious or guilt or God is going to punish me, all this stuff, we work on it, and we actually objectify or anthropomorphize, give it a form of uncertainty or whatever it is, so that when they are in the moment of doubt, they are noticing and welcoming in the uncertainty. Okay, hello, uncertainty, have a seat, breathe it in, and allow it to be there while I do this reading. So.
Annabella, I love that you brought up, well, two things, and I'll go to Emily and Caitlin too, but I love that you brought up values, and you do such a great job of that in your book as well, and kind of moving through and actually picking, why are we doing these hard things? Because it can be really, really challenging, at least for me, when asked to do exposures. It's like, well, why would I do that if I don't have something to do it for? And the values piece still plays into my life in a big way. I was thinking, I was visiting family last weekend, and sometimes I think a lot of folks in the chat can probably relate to getting stuck when we go on vacation, because OCD loves to pack a suitcase when we are so excited about doing something. And especially when we go back to places where we were a kid or remember engaging in compulsions at a different point in our life. And I got really stuck, like more stuck than I had gotten in a long, long time. And I was going around and around and around, and I was actually standing in the kitchen trying to figure out if I was a horrible person or if people hated me for very specific reasons that now kind of don't make sense, but did at the time. And as I was going around and around, I was looking out, I could see a window with my family sitting outside with my mom, my dad, and Ethan. Some of y'all know my mom is navigating a really difficult type of cancer. And I was looking at them all sitting there being present together. I was like, what am I doing? Like, family is such a value for me. And I would rather find out all the scary stuff that I'm going through in this moment is true than continue to give up my life to OCD, then continue to give up my life of what's going on through that window with my values right now of spending time with my mom, especially, but these other people that I care about. And it's like, when you put it like that, when it's like, well, am I going to choose to move toward my value or away from my value? It's like, well, of course I'm going to do the scary thing.
I think I probably mentioned this in every live stream that I'm in, but again, that first placement at the OCDI, my role as an exposure coach, just to help people do their exposures. And the one woman that I was working with holding onto her garbage can and just sobbing, like uncontrollably sobbing. And me, little practicum student, being like, why are you doing this? And her response to me was, so I can hug my nephews again. And I am going to carry that memory with me forever.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's beautiful. I'd love to go, Emily, to you as we talk about the kind of the why and the scary aspect. And I love this values piece. I think it's so incredibly important. I would also love to hear a little bit more about cultural responsiveness and treatment. And I think one of the things that folks love to hear is that, wait, they're not going to be asked to do something from an exposure perspective that totally and completely opposes their faith. And I would love to hear, I mean, what does that mean? How does cultural responsiveness go?
Yeah. So number one, I think just going off the values, right? Really understanding what does it look like to practice your religion? Like, what would you ideally want to do? And how does that compare to what the congregation that you're in? How do they practice, right? Having that as kind of our base and knowing what that looks like is important, right? We can have a value, but how do we define that behaviorally? Is practicing your religion, just going to church? Does it mean that you read the Bible on your own? There's so many different ways that people practice. There's not just one way to have faith. And so part of treatment really is helping people identify and learn how to practice faith in a way that aligns with their values versus their OCD, right? So really what we're trying to do, and clinicians who specialize in OCD should never force you to do an exposure that involves doing things that are forbidden or even request that you give up some sort of core belief of your faith. That is not something that treatment should be targeting. Really, we want to be helping you learn how to practice your faith in a way that's really similar to the congregation. This is the like 80-20 rule, right? Would 80% of your congregation do what you're doing, right? Or do they not do that? Because really what it comes down to is this is how you value faith. This is OCD's skewed version of faith. And we're going to be trying to move in that direction. So I have heard so many people come and tell me, my therapist made me do this and it was against my religious belief and I just wanted to give up on therapy. And it's truly my hope that, you know, people become more culturally responsive too, because we all practice differently. It's so important to ask hard questions and keep an open mind about what people may want to practice and how they want to practice. And I don't know if anyone else has something to say about cultural responsiveness. Yeah, I was like, anyone can jump in.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump in because
and Annabella, we'll get to you too, I promise. We'll all talk about it.
This is definitely somewhere that I want to jump in because there is the kind of the line between what do you call it? Yeah, like the culturally respectful and OCD's hard line. Right. So this is why I feel it is so integral to incorporate a faith leader in your treatment to help kind of really break down that what is genuinely unacceptable within religion versus what does OCD say is unacceptable. So let's say, for example, taking a Ouija board and playing with the Ouija board. Within Catholicism, that's a hard no. Like your religious leaders would say, absolutely not. So it is unfortunate, you know, many folks who are practicing outside of their understanding of a given faith might recommend that as an exposure. But again, this is where I am saying, like, it is important to have clergy or your faith leader involved so that we can get a good understanding of what the actual boundary is. And then also not what OCD says the boundary is. So I had a client myself who like put a hard limit on even touching a Ouija board, even just holding the box. And holding a box is not the same thing as pulling out the game and trying to play it. And I asked him, I was like, but what if you worked at Toys R Us and you had to stock the shelves, right? So incorporating the faith leader for those two important reasons. One, what is actually off limits? And two, what is on limits that your OCD just says, I would never do that. That is an inappropriate exposure. Right. It's like our wonderful colleague, Jed Siv likes to say, you know, we're not going to ask you to eat a cheeseburger within the Jewish faith, but how do you eat an udder? Right. How do you eat a cow's udder that is muscle and has held milk? Right. We are going to the line of acceptable, not further into the against religious teachings and rules.
And you don't have to do the most extreme thing to you know, move forward in your OCD treatment. You don't, right? We can do approximations, but I think what you said is so true. Getting faith leaders on board, really helping them understand OCD as well, so that we're all on the same page and there's not, you know, reassurance. They're getting on the same page in treatment, making sure that we all know this is the plan for how we're going to practice faith right now is so integral. And yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up.
It's so important. And I'll go to Annabella. Yeah, Annabella, I know you want to chime in with this too. Go ahead.
I would also add, I totally agree with all of you. I would also add family members, because the problem is sometimes when a client with OCD, scrupulosity, OCD, moral OCD, or any OCD, it has a severe case of OCD, you will share something. Maybe you talk to the faith leader, and then the client still is misunderstanding you, misunderstanding the faith leader, and maybe the parents are, you know, or spouse or whoever, right? We need to know the whole culture. And for example, I'm just thinking about this commandment, right, or scripture in Proverbs: for as he thinketh, so is he. Wait, we have a problem, because if that is in the scriptures and I'm having bad thoughts, then I am those bad thoughts. And so what are we going to do with that? And what I do, especially with teenagers mainly, I want to know what the parents are teaching the child. What is the culture, right? Because if you the client is telling you one thing, well, you need to check to see what else is going on. And the idea that, again, you are not maybe trespassing their values, but a lot of times you have OCD, my clients will say, well, I think that you are. For example, I had a client with thoughts of naked bodies, let's say, in a sexual OCD with scrupulosity OCD. So I need to cover those bodies. And I said, so what happens if you don't? Well, I'm sinning against God. So he truly believes that if he does not cover the bodies, then he's sinning. So he would probably go home and tell his family, my therapist is asking me to do something that is against my values. I had another client who had blasphemous thoughts, went home, he was a teenager, and told his parents, my therapist is asking me to say blasphemous thoughts. So the parents came, and I said, okay, let's talk about it. We have the same faith, the same religion. Nevertheless, the culture was different, etc. So, I respected the client, I respected the parents, and I explained what was going on, what we needed to do. And I said, okay, we can get around it in a different way. Because at the end of the day, you're not saying the thoughts out loud, but you're still having them inside of you. So go ahead and just notice the thought. That's how you can get around. Okay, I'm not going to do a compulsion, but just notice the thought. So I think that, yes, besides the faith leaders, you need to know the family culture as well.
I'm so glad you brought up that piece too. And especially, I mean, really with anybody, but especially, I know we're talking about kids, but then also with families and going home to spouse. I mean, whatever that looks like, the family culture is so important. And with all of this, what I hope y'all are hearing is it's never about disrespecting faith. Exposure and response prevention is not about disrespecting your faith. And I always talk about, I think there's kind of this line between discomfort and respect. And in treatment, you will be asked to do things that are uncomfortable, but not asked to do things that cross a line or that disrespect your faith. And there's what Caitlin was talking about with consulting. That's what I primarily do all the time, of kind of helping folks navigate that with their clinicians. And the biggest question I always ask someone, because I always say, nobody's going to walk in and say, I am so pumped to do this exposure today. Like that, at least that's never been my experience. Maybe that's yours. But my question is always, why don't you want to do the exposure? And if it's, well, it makes me feel really uncomfortable and I'm scared something bad is going to happen, it's like, probably a good exposure that we're doing. But if it's, well, this is completely against my faith, and my faith leader has said this is something that I shouldn't do, and this is something that 80% of the folks in my congregation would never engage in, I just don't want to do it. It's not something that's a different story. And there's a really big difference between those two answers, and addressing, how do we create things that are, that yes, create discomfort, but that aren't crossing a line, and engaging, again, the faith leader, but also family and family culture in that is so important. I also, the last piece I'll bring up with the family piece is, for especially when we're talking about kids and OCD and family and scrupulosity, and I'm curious what y'all think with this too. One of the biggest questions I get from parents is, but I pray with my child, and how do we do this in a way that isn't compulsive, right? Because sometimes prayer can become compulsive for individuals, or I'll have parents say, but I want my child to be able to pray to get rid of their OCD, which very much can become a compulsion in ways that are not helpful. But I love encouraging, and I'm curious what y'all think, I love encouraging families or even faith leaders to, why don't we flip the script? Why don't we not pray to get rid of OCD, but why don't we actually, through the lens of our tradition, pray for the strength to sit with this discomfort, to sit with this uncertainty, the strength to do all of these really hard things so that we can reclaim the life that the divine has created us to live.
God grant me strength.
Mm-hmm.
You know my heart. You know that I am trying very hard. Grant me the strength to move forward with recovery so that I can engage with my faith in a way that feels free and loving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? No, it's okay if not. Any other thoughts on this, Emily or Annabella, before we transition to the last piece?
I invite my clients to do a grateful prayer and to find out what would it look like when they're not continually asking in prayer, because again, respect the faith and what they want to do. But again, change the prayer a little bit to so that it's not compulsive. And a grateful prayer will be awesome to do. And again, I invite them to say, thou knows my thoughts, my desire, be thy will. And sometimes that doesn't go very well. So we work towards that because it is hard. It is hard.
If God is all knowing, he doesn't need reminding.
Exactly.
I always tell folks, if really across faith traditions, it's like, wow, if God created the universe and he's all powerful and all knowing, then I'm pretty sure God can handle us doing this little exposure that's kind of scary over here. I think we can.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I just I don't know if it has anything to do with it, but I think it does. When somebody commits a perceived sin and then they go and repent and pray, I ask, what are you looking for? Well, I want God to forgive me. And then we talk about their religious beliefs, etc. And we end up sometimes recognizing, actually the client recognizing, oh, wait a minute. I don't need to ask forgiveness. Again, God knows me. And then for some reason, I don't know what I say or whatever, but then they start thinking, well, maybe the one I need to forgive is myself. And I'm like, oh my goodness, yes, this is awesome. So I invite the client to, when they have the urge to pray and ask for forgiveness, would they kind of turn around and say, can I be willing to forgive myself in this moment? That way, it's changing the urge, it's changing the compulsion, but it's turning it to them, because at the end of the day, we talk about how much God loves them, and God loves them as they are. Therefore, can you love yourself as He loved you? And I've had those experiences where people are just, the light bulb goes on for them. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing the wrong thing. I am asking for forgiveness when I'm the one that needs to forgive myself. So I just wanted to share that with you because it's pretty beautiful to see that happening.
I love that, Annabella. I love that. And that is such a perfect place for us, I think, to wrap up our discussion, to close on just such a beautiful note. And yes, Sarah, giving ourselves grace, doing the best we can right now in this moment. And I would love, on that note, to go around to all of our panelists and just, if you have a final thought that you want to leave with folks here tonight about faith, OCD, scrupulosity, really anything that's come up for you throughout our discussion. So Caitlin, no pressure.
Can you tell by my grin that I'm so excited for this moment?
First, because you're like,
my parting reflection is going to be to say to the folks that are listening who feel like they have to make sure that they don't make a single misstep, that they have to make sure that they're being absolutely perfect so as not to be rejected by God. What I tell the folks that I work with is, one person has walked this earth without making a mistake, without sin. Are you Jesus? Because if you are, then okay, I guess it makes sense. But if you're not Jesus, then I feel like it's probably not really attainable to not make any mistakes. But I'm willing, to be told that no, the person in front of me is genuinely Jesus Christ.
I love that, Caitlin. I love that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Emily.
Yeah, I think just my parting statement would be, I hope that everyone takes a leap of faith. Those that are in treatment, those are considering treatment, even if it's hard, even if you're not really sure what the outcome is, you are all so capable, and you can reclaim your life. And my hope at the end of all of it is you learn to trust yourself more than you trust your OCD.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Beautiful. And Annabella.
Well, I already said it, but I'll say one more thing. When you're having a hard time, remember how God sees you, and remember that love. And also, if you don't believe in God, well, remember how your parents see you, how your loved ones see you, and they love you, and you feel their love, and can you do that love for yourself as well? Be patient, be hopeful, because it's possible to change the way you look at your thoughts and your feelings.
Thank you, Annabella. I relate so much. My favorite thing to say to clients, again, across faith traditions, is really I always say my prayer for you is that you can see yourself through the same loving eyes through which the divine sees you. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful thing when people are able to do that. It really, really is. And self-compassion, I've seen unconditional love, self-compassion, I've seen come up in the chat.
And I just have to say one more thing, which is as you guys are talking, and my best friend is John Grayson. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. We're besties. But what he talks about is learning to honor the God that you believe in instead of the God that OCD has created. Which God are you worshiping? Are you worshiping the God that you believe in, or are you worshiping the God that OCD has fabricated? Oh, hi, John.
Hi, John. This will be our next. We need to do like a whole stream on that, because we could do another like 3 hours just on that. But thank you. Thank you all so much. So don't go anywhere. I just want to give some announcements real quick. So everybody hang tight. Just want to note that the online OCD conference registration is now open. So you can visit iocdf.org/online-OCDcon to register. This year's online OCD conference will feature 2 days of virtual programming for the entire OCD and related disorders community. It is so much fun. Please sign up. We would love to hang out with you there. Also, walks are taking place across the country. You can visit iocdf.org/walk to find a walk near you. And this live stream is one of many. You can see the entire schedule of future streams at iocdf.org/peace of mind. And you can also view recordings of past live streams, as well as watch our hosts answer your pre-submitted questions, OCD Mailbag, on IOCDF's YouTube channel, youtube.com/IOCDF. Remember to like and subscribe to get notified when live streams are scheduled. And if you're looking for what's upcoming, we have a research roundtable tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern. And then next Tuesday, back here, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern, is Ethan with Community Conversations. So lots of great stuff coming up. We are so thankful for all of you. We are so thankful for just your willingness to advocate, to be here, to be in the chat, to be authentic. We are also thankful for Brennan behind the scenes and our IOCDF staff that help keep the lights on here. And I want to close by saying thank you to our amazing panelists, and just that I hope you all heard in the self-compassion area that you are absolutely enough, just the way that you are in this moment. And wherever you are on your journey with OCD, with scrupulosity, with faith in OCD, whatever that looks like for you, there is so much hope, and you are deserving of the big, beautiful, awesome life that you were created to live. So we will see you next time, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. See you, ladies. Bye-bye.